Good morning, good afternoon all. I'd like to welcome you to the first of a three-part webinar series, Challenges and Opportunities for Women in STEM. Today we are partnering with the Israel Ministry of Science and Technology, the Victoria State Government of Australia, the IACC, and Women in STEM Australia. My name is Miriam Seiber, and I am the Melbourne Biomedical Director based here in Israel with the Israel-Australia Chamber of Commerce and the Victorian Government Trade and Investment Office. We feel very lucky to be a part of a phenomenal innovation ecosystem here in Israel, surrounded by the best of the best in academia, in research, in innovation and startups. Our work is to help maximize their interaction with the rest of the world. So we work with companies and governments and academia to find technology solutions or research partners throughout the world. And so you might ask, why Israel? So as I mentioned, Israel is the startup nation. There are over 6,000 high-tech companies at any one time, more than 600 new startups per year. Very interestingly enough, a lot of the VC money, about 80%, comes from abroad. And in terms of R&D expenditure, we are #1 in the world as well. So with that in mind, we feel very lucky for the network that we have here in Israel. I'd like to thank our organising committee from the Israel Ministry of Science and Technology. Firstly, Dr. Sharon Rashi Elkalis, who is chairwoman for the Council for the Advancement of Women in Science and Technology. Also Dr. Efrat Salton-Meyer, who is the academic advisor for the council as well. And we also have Yehudis Natan, who is the director of Asia and Africa department at the ministry. So thanks all. We put in a lot of hard work and we're very excited about today's webinar, as well as the webinars to come. So welcoming greetings. To start off, we are honoured to have Shai-Lee Spigelman, the Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Science and Technology, share welcoming greetings. As part of her role, she leads the formulation of the government's national long-term strategy in science, technology and innovation and its implementation. Thank you, Shai-Lee.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for this great morning here in Israel, and I guess afternoon or evening in Australia. So first, I don't know if you know, and I don't know if it's a coincidence, but today is the National Day for Young Women and Women in Science Technology by the UN. So this is really not just an Israel-Australia event, but just a global event and a global day, to think about or raise awareness of the importance of having more women in science, technology, and STEM. This is Women in STEM webinar. Is one of the first one of a series of webinars. And we are so glad that so many of you joined to participate in our webinar, and looking forward for all of your involvement in the next webinars. Israel, as you mentioned, is known for its being very strong on technology and science, known as the startup nation. We have a thriving high-tech sector, as well as cutting-edge innovation in medicine and healthcare, in agriculture and AI, quantum, in many fields. So in general, we're in a very good position. However, women representation in many of these fields in Israel is not as we would like it to be, and it's relatively low, even in relative to other advanced countries. So if we think about some of the numbers, only 22% of women in technology position, and if you go to higher management positions, going down to even 18%. Looking at entrepreneurs of the startup nation, only 7% of Israeli technology entrepreneurs are women. It's very, very low. Looking in academia, only looking at general students in academia, as I think in most fields, there are more women than men, which is great, but looking at the higher levels, faculty staff, so professors, full professorships or full professors in Israel, out of the number of professors, only 18 of women have full professorship. So, which is again, not sorry, 18 out of the professors are women, which is again not a good number. So there's a lot of work to be done. We're just on our way. So here in the Ministry of Science and Technology, the promotion of women to STEM studies is one of our priorities. And we're having many different programs from the Council of Promoting Women to Science and Technology that Dr. Sharon Kalas is leading. It is part of the ministry, but also we have different programs. One program called Scientists of the Future, and other programs to promote women into science and technology, starting from high school or K to 12, go all the way to academia and the workforce. Looking at this major challenge, international collaborations are essential to promoting women in STEM. And me personally, highly value the cooperation with our Ministry of Science and Technology and the State of Victoria in this webinar series, Women in STEM, because I believe that will be a good start of global cooperation and international cooperation, and together we can fully achieve our goals and think together and explore different ways of how to create inspiration to promote women in STEM, joint thoughts, promoting education, inspiration, sharing learnings, and other things and best practices that we can make sure that we change the numbers I just mentioned. I would like to strongly thank everyone who were involved and led this webinar to this very exciting meeting today. First of all, I would like to thank our Australian partner, Miriam Cyber from the Victoria Government Trade and Investment Office for your collaboration. And from the Israeli side, I would like to thank Dr. Sharon Kalas, the chairwoman of the Council for Advancement of Women in Science and Technology under the Ministry of Science and Technology, Dr. Efrat Salton-Meyer, our academic advisor to this seminar, to this webinar series. And she's also the academic advisor of the Council for Advancement of Women in Science and Technology. I would like to thank Judith Natan, the director of Asia Africa Department under the Ministry of Science and Technology, and Noah Barak, who is the spokeswoman for our Ministry of Science and Technology. So I would like to thank all of you for this exciting morning and afternoon, and hopefully it will be the beginning of a great friendship and interesting day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shai-Lee. Next up, I'd like to introduce Tim Dillon. Tim is the Agent General to the UK and Commissioner for Victoria to Europe and Israel. Thank you, Tim.
Great, thank you very much, Miriam. Good. Can I just check, Miriam, am I coming through okay?
Yep, we can hear you, we can see you. That's great, thank you.
Excellent. Good morning or evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. It's my pleasure to be here to welcome you to the session, Challenges and Opportunities for Women in STEM. My name is Tim Dillon, and I'm the Victorian Agent General to the United Kingdom and Commissioner to Europe and Israel. The Victorian government has 23 international offices that work to support trade and investment activities. And in 2017, we were very proud to open an office in Tel Aviv to strengthen the relationship between our two regions. Unfortunately, due to COVID and restrictions, I have not been able to travel to visit Israel since starting my role in August last year. But I have been fortunate enough to hold a number of virtual calls with Israeli organisations, including the Innovation Authority, venture capitalists and startups, as well as incubators and a range of other companies. I have been so impressed by the amount of talent and innovation that exists in Israel. And I'm sure a lot of this traces back to Israel's strong STEM training. It is an honour to partner with the Israeli Ministry of Science and Technology for this session, and to have just heard from Shai-Lee Spigelman, Director General of the Ministry of Science and Technology, to learn more about Israel's approach. I was particularly interested to hear that today is a UN globally designated day for women in tech. So what a great opportunity it is for us to be a part of that and help spread the message. There is recognition in Australia that STEM training, particularly among women, is falling behind. The most recent Victorian budget had a clear focus on encouraging more women into STEM professions, including funding to encourage more female involvement in our large-scale infrastructure projects, and also $10 million to fund support for female-led startups. It's great to see such an eminent panel of speakers today. I'm really looking forward to hearing that both from Australia and Victoria and Israel. But I'm particularly pleased that we're able to have our Chief Scientist, Amanda Capels, participating today. I started working with Amanda over 20 years ago in the Victorian government when she was leading Victoria's life science industry policy, and she has been instrumental in building Melbourne into a leading global life sciences hub as it's recognised today. She now holds the highest position in science in our state and is a strong advocate for women in STEM. So I cannot think of a better person to be here representing us from the state government. As a father stuck at home, struggling to teach my daughter maths, I'm experiencing firsthand the challenges to engage women in STEM, but also how important and fundamental these skills are for future industries. Indeed, it's appropriate now. STEM professions have got us through COVID. Engineers designed innovative ventilators to fill gaps in the market at the start of the pandemic. Tech specialists have kept us working and connected from home, and scientists have raced against the clock to develop the vaccine in record time. COVID globally has also disproportionately impacted women, with women losing their jobs at a much higher rate, making today's discussion even more important. So thank you to the organisers, particularly the webinar organising committee mentioned before. I'd like to thank also our staff in Tel Aviv and Miriam, the great work that you've done there, and congratulations everyone involved in this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. We look forward to finally hosting you here in Israel and of course introducing you to the ministry when we do so. Now, before we begin, I just want to note that if anyone has any questions, there's a Q&A box in the bottom of the screen in the middle. So please post questions throughout and we hope to answer them at the end. Alrighty. Alrighty, now before I introduce Professor Rivka Karmi, building on what Shai-Lee mentioned, the UN will be celebrating International Day of Women and Girls in Science. Now, interestingly enough, the 2021 theme is Women Scientists at the Forefront of the Fight Against COVID-19. So the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic has clearly demonstrated the critical role of women researchers in different stages of the fight against COVID-19, from advancing the knowledge of the virus to developing techniques for testing, taking care of our most sick citizens, and finally to creating the vaccine against the virus. So notably, Professor Rivka Karmi, former president of Ben-Gurion University, will be speaking about women in medicine, clinical and scientific perspectives with a special reference to COVID-19. Professor Rivka Karmi served as president of Ben-Gurion University of the Negev between the years of 2006 to 2018, and prior to that as the dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences at Ben-Gurion University. A graduate of Hadassah Medical School of the Hebrew University, she is a board-certified pediatrician, neonatologist and medical geneticist who also served as the director of Genetics Institute at the Soroka University Medical Center. In 2010, she became the first woman to chair Israel's Committee to University Heads. Thank you, Rivka.
Well, thank you, Miriam, for this very generous introduction, and good afternoon, good morning to everybody here. Thank you very much for having me here. And I'm looking forward to listening and having this experience about STEM. Obviously, I'm talking about medicine, and the next slide will show you that the medical profession is undergoing feminization, with almost 15% of OECD countries having more women physicians than doctors, men physicians. And with medical school all over the world, you have here 2017, but it's for more than a decade, almost 2 decades, there are more students, women, in medicine than men. So you might ask, what does that has to do with STEM? I mean, there are so many women. Why are we talking about? What are we talking about? And I'll say, and I'll maintain that there is some similarities, very major ones, and especially I would like to talk about what happens in a profession that is now taken by women. What are the challenges farther down the line? And they are huge. So the first thing is that women their choices in medical professions are different than men. And you have here two schemes. You don't have to be able to read it. I'll just tell you that the very right end of this scheme that shows the percentage of board certified women in various medical professions in Israel, the very end side is all the surgicals, the hardcore surgical professions where the presence of women is almost negligible. The lower one is actually the pipeline, women that are residents in those professions. So there is an increase, as you can see, with the years, but still it is very, very low. Next slide, please. We'll show you that it looks very, next one, looks very, and I'm sorry for the quality of this slide, but it looks very similar to what we see in the faculty. This is a slide from the Technion, a very recent one. And on the right end, you can see the women faculty in the stem cell professions. So it looks very, very similar. And next one, and the question is always, is it a free choice of women? Or is it, other constraints such as ones that have been studied all over the years? Is it career family balance? Is it the absence of role models, which is a vicious cycle? You don't have faculty, you don't have students, and vice versa. Or is it women unfriendly culture environment? All those issues have been raised in a search in medicine, and I think they are applying. You can apply it very easily to STEM as well. Next slide, please. Relate to the problem that although there are excess of women in a medical profession, women are still a minority in leadership positions in medicine, in a very, very, what can I say, minority. It is an understatement. Next slide, please, show you. This is from Israel. You don't have to understand the Hebrew. You just look at the pie of gender distribution of medical department heads in Israel as of 3 years ago. So 70%, and what's even more of concern is the fact that the deputy department heads, only 1%. So even the pipeline is very, very limited. Next slide, please. You can see how many women are head of hospitals or HMOs. And again, only 9%. This is of 2018, 3 years ago. The numbers are very similar now. Now, also in academic medicine, and this is compiled data from USA as of 2018, only 18% of medical schools deans are women. Only 18% of medical school chairs are women. And even in pediatrics, when there are women, abundance of women for many years, only 26 chairs. And this is although the majority of full-time faculty and physicians are women. So when you go to other leadership or position in the academic hospital medicine programs, you see most of them are men. So you see on the left side, you have directors in blue and women in red. But if you consider the other leaders, in general, what you see is a very significant part of them are professors. So being a professor is a prerequisite to be in senior profession, mainly in academic medicine. At that year, in 2018, there was no women full professors in those positions. Next one, please. And this is a new one, a new study by New England Journal of Medicine that just last year. And it said that over 35 years period, women physicians in academic medical centers were less likely than men to be promoted to the rank of associate or full professor or to be appointed to department chair. And there was, and this is the main concern, no apparent narrowing in the gap over years. So they took two cohorts from 1917 to 1997 versus 98 to 2013, and there was no narrowing of that gap. Now, I don't have to tell you that being a head of a hospital or an academic program in medical school, obviously being a dean, it is being in a decision-making position, the place where decisions are made vis-a-vis patients, vis-a-vis students, vis-a-vis medical education. And next slide is something new, just from last year. Men predominate in more than 85 of COVID-19 decision-making and key advisory boards around the globe. So they have looked at the 87 countries, 115 experts in decision-making COVID-19 task force. And they found that men predominate in more than 85% of expert groups. And in 81 of them, they were the one to head them. But even more important and more interesting is the fact that expert groups more often had higher proportion of women than decision-making committees. So we are very good at giving advices, but we are not the one that made the decision. Obviously, I'm not going to relate to the position in the former administration of the USA, which was really awful and hopefully being remedied right now. Next slide says, so what? And this is a question I was asked by a bunch of hospital directors when I presented to them the evidence. Said, what do you mean? Are we doing a much worse medicine because we don't have women in senior and leading positions? My question, my gut, my instinctive answer was yes. Yes, you are doing a less, not so good medicine because of that. And why is that? Because women doctors differ from men doctors in both practice pattern, clinical practice pattern, and both managerial scheme. Next slide. And this is a compiling of data from many research done that shows that women doctors are more evidence-based and patient care oriented. They tend to recommend more standard screening tests, and it means that they believe in prevention and they promote prevention. Patients of primary and family doctors have less ER visits, and there is a new study shows that when female discharge people from the hospital, there are less readmissions and less mortality compared to men. And what's not less important is that 70% of serious malpractice complaints are against male doctors. Next slide, please. And when you go to women at the helm, CEO in the medical profession, so hospital consumers assessment of healthcare providers done in 391 non-rural hospitals between 2007 and 18 and 11 show that women CEOs have an apparent propensity for transforming healthcare organization in the direction of patient-centeredness, particularly in most demanding circumstances. And we already know that women are much better leaders in times of crisis than men. Next slide, please. And this is the last one I'm going to show you to really provide the basis of the evidence for that female are functioning differently. And I think in the benefit of us as patients and medicine in general. So medical manufacturers with female directors act more quickly on recalls when there is a life-threatening situation related to a kind of a medical product. So they do it very fastly. But when, for less severe instances, when there is a more discretion to the CEO in the recall decision, they recall it more frequently. So next slide says, what are the implications? The implications are for patients' outcome and safety, that's for sure, in both morbidity and mortality. It is very, very important for prevention because we all believe very strongly in prevention rather than treatment. But it is also very effective when it comes to budgets because hospitalizations and recurrent admissions are a very good, very big chunk in the expenses of hospital, and not to mention malpractice suits that really put a very serious demand on insurers and hospitals as well. So when those head of hospitals attack me again and say, what the heck, are we doing not a good medicine? I say no, but yes, you're doing a bad medicine, but also go look, next slide, take some lessons from Fortune 500s or Fortune 10 or 1,000 companies, where it was shown again and again, starting about 25 years ago to this year, that when you have more women in senior leadership roles, you are more profitable, you are more competitive, you're doing much better on return on your stocks. And, you know, sometimes money do convince head of organizations, especially in medicine, to look at things a little bit different. And next one, this is the claims that they use to justify this gender unbalance in medical leadership. They say that there is not enough women to promote, which is absolutely not true. They say that women do not compete for leadership roles because of family and lifestyle, meaning balancing career and family. And women lack the prerequisites required for the position. In the case of academic medicine or even clinical medicine, when it goes to department heads, it really has to go with having a professorship. And professorship is a matter of how much you research, how much you publish. And I want to end by showing you that at least these two, okay, the fact that women has to juggle her career and life and lifestyle, and they don't have the capacity to really get into the point where they are eligible. I think next slide, very well depicted by what's happening this year during the COVID crisis. So this is from the Journal of Women's Health in a very recent article from 2 weeks ago. STEM women scientists reported a significant decrease in first and co-author manuscript submission during COVID-19, whereas no significant differences in productivity were reported by men. Next one is another one by JAMA Surgery that shows that fewer women are submitting manuscript to JAMA Surgery during the pandemic. And next one, it is from the Center of Bioethics and Social Sciences in Medicine at the University of Michigan. This is an online report that analyzed almost 2,000 articles related to COVID-19 published between January and June of last year, compared to over 85 papers published in 2019. And they again showed, next slide, that the proportion of COVID-19 papers with a woman first author was 90% lower compared to papers published a year before. And surprise, surprise, the share of women first authors in March and April publications were particularly low, 23% lower, as you may remember. March and April, both in Israel and in Europe and maybe elsewhere, were the times of really severe lockdown when everybody was inside, including kids. And this obviously suggests that there is a further worsening. Actually, the COVID crisis has further worsened the gender gap in academic medicine. It was published before, but there is a chance now that the foreseen future 2 or 3 years, women will struggle a lot in obtaining professorship in order to be able to be promoted to these leadership roles. Next slide. So indeed, these are the major barriers that need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed everywhere, in STEM, in medicine, and in every other profession. So career-family balance is obviously important. Absence of role models, absolutely, we have to address that. Women unfriendly culture environment, yes, there is unfriendly culture environment, especially in the STEM and, as I showed you, in the surgery professions in medicine. But there is something else. Next slide. This is Donna Strickland, our joy and pride. She's a Nobel Prize laureate in physics, which is absolutely STEM, of 2018, from the University of Waterloo in Canada. And she was promoted to the rank of full professor only after being awarded with the Nobel Prize. So unfortunately, because of the fashion we are handling this presentation, I cannot see you. Otherwise, I would have asked you, what do you think was the reason for that? And I'm sure we would get different answers. But what is the answer? When she was asked, how come? And she said, next slide, I never applied. So whether this is a matter of indifference, whether this is a matter of insecurity or other reasons, why women, unlike men, simply don't aspire, don't push themselves. And I think this is one of the very important issues that we have to address, both in the medical profession, but especially in STEM. Address and not neglect the need to empower women to really go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rivka, for that very interesting and inspiring presentation. It's a very complex situation, but it's great to see, looking at your CV and the successes of, your career, what is possible, and noting the importance of the confidence and that empowering the individuals that they can achieve what they're looking to do. And they just sometimes need that extra push. Although it is complex, thank you very much. All right.
Thank you.
All right, next I have the honour to introduce Dr. Amanda Caples, Victoria's lead scientist. Dr. Caples is responsible for working across the Victorian government to identify opportunities for economic outcomes by building relationships between businesses, the research sector and government. Amanda brings to the role broad experience in technology, commercialisation, public policy development and governance of public and private entities. Building on what Tim mentioned, I'll just note that Amanda is pivotal in the strategy and planning for many programs for women in STEM in Victoria. And I might also note that in terms of her role and her position, she's the epitome of a role model for all of us, for all young girls and the little young girls within us all. So thank you, Amanda, who will be presenting science and research in the 2020s, Women Can Seize the Day.
Thanks very much, Miriam, and shalom. It's a real pleasure to be here today. And just by way of background, my discipline is pharmacology. I've spent most of my career in the industry, so in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry. And then, as Tim mentioned, joined the Victorian State Government as the first Director of Biotechnology. And the reason for that was when I was at the end of my first year of a science degree at the University of Melbourne, my course advisor questioned my choice of doing pharmacology and said, why do you want to do that? There are no jobs in the pharmaceutical industry. So, so that really just inspired me to change that perception. And so it was a really great pleasure to have been instrumental in taking that forward over the past 20 years. So Australia, Victoria and Israel share a lot in common, and the data, the evidence that Rivka produced, I can readily identify with, and whoops, thanks Miriam. I can readily identify with because it really represents what is going on in Australia, and no doubt Maggie later will talk more to that. What I thought I would do today is talk about my COVID experience, but in a different way, and in a way of talking about, and there is an ongoing need to, particularly in Australia, less so in Israel, but no doubt there is still an imperative that we've constantly got to make the case for investment in science. And so when we started working from home, which was about March of last year, I thought, well, what can we do that will really make a difference? And how can we ensure that science is part of the economic recovery? Because as we all know, it's pivotal, whether we're talking about specific diagnostics or therapeutics or vaccines for COVID, or whether we're talking about manufacturing, it's all important for both a prosperous future and, excuse me, a healthy one. So, so what I did was commission this report, and I've put the link in this presentation. You're welcome to take a look at it online. And it really looks at a period of investment where Victoria had a concentrated effort in lifting the science and research base in our ecosystem. And we did an evaluation in 2009, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to look at, to reprise that evaluation and then look at, well, where are we today in 2020 as it was then? And how can I tell the story of the impact of that investment to not only the capability that exists within our ecosystem, but also to take a look at how that system has helped us respond to the COVID pandemic. Next slide, Miriam. So I won't go through the detail of the report because you can read it, but the bottom line is that the take-home message is sustained investment in science and research has a huge economic impact, both in terms of jobs, in attracting investment, whether that's within the state, outside of the state, globally. It, of course, supports local SMEs and startups and creates new linkages with the services sectors that support them. So that's probably not any great surprise to the people who are tuning in today. But I think it's always important to feed back to government and demonstrate. I think there's an obligation on us to demonstrate that they've made good investments, and here is the evidence, much like Rivka has presented the evidence of the problem around women in STEM broadly across not only career subjects, but of course across the hierarchy of jobs throughout the system. So I'm pleased to say that government received this report really well, and that the budget that was announced towards the end of last year has taken significant steps to support science and, as we've heard already from the remarks that Tim has made, support women in science. So we've made a start. There's a lot more that needs to be done, quite clearly, because of all the issues that Rivka has so clearly articulated. Next slide. So the opportunity is in science. The challenge is, how do we get young women, young girls into STEM disciplines? Because if they're not STEM capable, how are we going to enable them to have equal opportunity that jobs that require STEM require? So this slide just shows you more or less our version of what Rivka has presented, which is that sadly in Australia, less than 30% of girls choose to study STEM in high school. And you compare that to India and to China, and the contrast is stark. So what are we going to do about this? Because this is not a recent problem. And so I'm calling for us all to take really substantive action to turn this around, because we know what the problems are and we know pretty much what's driving them. So what are we going to do about it? Well, next slide. The good news is that we're not the only ones who see this as a problem and are passionate about doing something about it. And so an activity that I commenced before we went into COVID last year was to say, well, we've got over 175 programs that are either specifically addressing the supply chain from girls at kindergarten, primary, secondary, up through universities, or mixed programs that are all about encouraging everyone to increase their interest in STEM. And so there are many people like us who are wanting to take action, but how do you know where to find the right program for you, and who else is doing or delivering programs in this area? So next slide. What we put together and announced just about 2 weeks ago is a Women and Girls in STEM map, which is on our webpage, so is readily available, and again the link will be on the next slide. And it's really a resource which seeks to categorise the different programs according to the target market, being kindergarten, primary, secondary, tertiary and professional, as we've heard. We can get women into STEM careers, but how can we keep them there? How can we enable them to progress up their career path? So it's a really simple device, and it's linked to so there's web links to the individual programs. And the intent is that it can be used by girls and women to find out where they can go for help. It can be used by teachers to understand where are some programs that they could tap into in order to inspire their students. It's really useful to service providers, because what we're seeking to do also is to find a way in which service providers can more readily identify where are the gaps in the supply of these services, and where are there opportunities to partner with sister organisations that can create an increased impact of what they are doing. So next slide. And here we are. We were at Swinburne University in the Factory of the Future. Minister Pulford, and we're delighted to have a Minister for Innovation, Medical Research and Digital Technologies who's a woman. She's quite passionate about what we're doing and doing in science and medical research here in Victoria, and a passionate advocate to support more women in STEM and in medical research in particular, aligned with her portfolios. So you can see the pull-out version of the map. We're using DNA as the signature icon throughout the resource, and you'll find links to all of the programs that are available in Victoria to Victorian students. And we hope that, in fact, that this type of resource is a really simple idea that can be readily copied elsewhere. And feel free, if this inspires you to create a similar product, you're more than welcome, because we've got to stop talking about the problem and help facilitate those people who are committed to doing something about it. It's complex, it's complicated, and it's hard. If it was easy, we wouldn't be here talking about it. And this is but a first step towards how we're seeking to turn it around and allow women to seize the opportunity, because science is the opportunity for this decade. And if we don't have women as active participants at all levels, then we're all going to be the poorer for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. What an exciting resource. And really inspiring to think that, for the young girl that is interested, that map is there for her and she has the resources in front of her. So great to see you together with Minister Pulford as well. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Professor Hagit Messer-Yaron, co-founder of Climacell and former president of the Open University. Hagit is an Israeli electrical engineer and business woman who has carried several high-level national positions, in particular being concerned about the status of women in science while serving as the chief scientist at the Ministry of Science. She initiated the establishment of the National Council for Women in Science in Israel and has been its first chairperson. Thank you, Hagit. I'll stop share.
Thank you. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and I hope I can match up with the previous marvelous talks. I'm the first engineer on the panel. As I said, I'm electrical engineer. I don't see myself as businesswoman, but I'm academician, professor of electrical engineering. And I will talk about women in engineering. In engineering, we do have a problem that probably we don't have in other topics. And it is presented in two dimensions. When we look about women in STEM, it is usually measured by two dimensions, the horizontal dimension, which measures differences between the share of women and men in different subjects, in different topics, in different professions. So when we look at women in engineering, in academia, the share of female students or faculty is between 10 and 30%. So it is measured by a dissimilarity index, and it is high dissimilarity index. If the dissimilarity index is about 1, it means that there is equal rate of women and men. So in engineering, the situation on the horizontal dimension is not great. Also in the workplace, as mentioned before, typically the share of women is less than 30%. The vertical dimension, which was mentioned before in other topics, is the glass ceiling. When you go to higher level, then the share of women decreases. And in engineering, we do have also the glass ceiling. There is a third dimension, which is more implicit. I will elaborate a little bit about it, that even when we get women into engineering in schools, in higher education, in the workplace, there is a high retention, there is a low retention of women in the industry, and we will say a few words about it. I saw in the Q&A session that somebody asked about sources of numbers, of data. I don't have to give credit to all, but on my slides, I put links to all the sources of data so you can use it. So the first source is the She Figures. She Figures is a publication by the European Commission, which looks at numbers of women in STEM or in academia or women in science in general. And on the left, you can see the well-known scissor diagram that represents the share of women against the share of men. in a different level in academia, starting from students and ending at full professor, the highest level of women in academia. And on the left, this is the chart for average over 28 European countries and all academic fields. And it is called the Caesar diagram because it looks like Caesar, with the share of women being higher than the share of men as a student, undergraduate and master student. It crosses around the PhD. And then when we go into working in academia, then the share of men increases, the share of women decreases. So there is a glass ceiling, as we all know, and as we said before. When we look at science and engineering, then these are not real scissors, right? Because you cannot cut anything with it because there is no crossing, as we have in the general case. Because on top of the glass ceiling, we also have a dissimilarity, which makes it such that there is never more than 40% women in science and technology in all levels, from undergraduate student to full professors. In the workplace, if we look generally, and this is data from a Society of Women Engineers in the US, only 13% of engineers are women, only 26% of computer scientists are women, and also, unluckily, female engineers earn 10% less than men. And as I mentioned before, there is a third dimension, and the third dimension is sometimes referred to as the leaky pipeline, which indicates on poor retention of women in STEM. And again, this is data from a Society of Women Engineers. And according to their data, women leaving engineering or STEM with terrible numbers. Over 32% of women switch out of STEM degree programs in college. Only 30% of women who earn bachelor degree in engineering are still working in engineering 20 years later. And 30% of women who have left engineering profession cite organizational climate as the reason. I must emphasize this aspect because people talk about women in STEM, promoting women or girls to study STEMs and then in the workplace. But if they leave, after all, this is terrible and something has to be done about it. Let's look at some data from the startup nation, from Israel. Is it different in Israel? I started with more general numbers. And about the numbers in Israel, look at the pyramid on the right. It starts from the basic level, which is the share of women and men or girls or boys that get math in high school with the highest level. The highest level of in high school in Israel is called 5 units. This is the top level in different topics. So we start with very optimistic view because almost half of the high school students who gets the top level in math, 5 units, 47% are women, which is great. When you go to physics or computers, then it is a bit lower, 36 or 32% in high school of the students who gets high-level physics or high-level computers are women. Then in Israel, we have compulsory army service. And in the army, there are many soldiers which are doing technical job as programmers or cyber experts. But if you look at the gender segregation, only 27% of the programmers are women, only 12% of the cyber experts are women in the army, in the compulsory service. And then when we go to university, to higher education, only 21% of the students in the high-tech topics are women in Israel. Actually, even worse news about women in high-tech topics in Israel is that out of the people who are entitled to go into high-tech topics in higher education, the people who gets the highest degree of 5 units in math, when you look at men, 70% of them will choose to go to to STEM topics in colleges and universities, but only 30% of them, of the women, will go to STEM topics. The other will go to law, to social sciences, to other topics which are not STEMs. So the potential is there, but it is not implemented. Some more data, I don't have time to go deeply into it, but if we look at trends, which is very interesting, over the years from 1995 to 2015, so over the years when we look at the share of female students starting university, so as said before, the share is more than 50% and it's almost constant. But if we look at high-tech topics, meaning mostly engineering and computer science, the share of women is about 30%, and it is almost constant, which is not so great. We can also look at a different indicator, which is the time it takes to graduate. We have a standard time for graduation in Israel. For example, in computer science, people are expected to graduate in 3 years. In engineering, they are expected to graduate in 4 years. This is not the case. But if we compare men and women, so the probability of women to graduate in the standard time is higher than the probability of men to do it, especially in engineering and in computer science, the two first categories. So women are doing better. In particular, in my Faculty of Engineering at Tel Aviv University, if we look at some data, so the share of women has increased recently and it reaches the level of 40%, which is nice, but the share of female faculty members is still quite terrible. It was 1 digit till 3 years ago. Now it has reached 10% and higher, but still out of 120 faculty members, we have 16 women only. Women in the workplace in Israel, here are some numbers. Again, the source is this report. In total, we are talking about 29 degrees, only 22 degrees in technical position, only 18 degrees in technical, 18% in a technical management position. And again, if we look at the trends over the years, it is almost constant. The total number increases because more women goes to high-tech employment, but the share is almost constant. And the third dimension about the leaky pipeline, I couldn't find the data about it, but a few years ago we did what I call a non-scientific survey. We send email to graduates, female graduates of the Faculty of Engineering, Electrical Engineering, and we got responses from 63 of them. And from this non-scientific survey, we found indication that 20% out of the people who got degree from Tel Aviv University in electrical engineering, 20% of them do not pursue career in electrical engineering. So we have indication from a leaky pipeline also in Israel. So to summarize the data, the situation of women in engineering and computer science in Israel is not different from other developed countries. On the horizontal dimension, fewer women than men choose career in engineering. On the vertical dimension, there is a glass ceiling. And on the third dimension, we see that while women present better retention as students in electrical engineering and computer science, there are evidences of a leaky pipeline in the workplace. Unfortunately, improvement over the years, if exists, is very, very slow. I want to finish with few optimistic conjectures because we need to look where the situation can change from. And I have few personal conjectures I want to share with you. And it is based on data, of course. We are scientists. And first, I look at the engineering students in my faculty, the Faculty of Engineering in Tel Aviv University. We have three major subjects: electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, biomedical engineering, and industrial engineering and management. And you can see that in electrical and mechanical engineering, the share of women students is low, but it is increasing over the years, and it reaches 20% lately. But if we look at biomedical engineering and industrial engineering and management, there is a majority of female students in the Faculty of Engineering in Tel Aviv University. So my conjecture is that emerging human-centric topics in engineering attract significantly more women. Electrical engineering, mechanical engineering is perceived as more technical. Biomedical engineering management is more human-centric, and since engineering is changing, more women are entering engineering. Another interesting, very recent data about Arab students in electrical engineering and computer science in Tel Aviv universities, and you can see the change over the years. Recent years, Arab men students, it has increased from 178 to 309, and with women, it has increased from 59 to 150. And if you share the rate, then the increase with female Arab students in high-tech topics, it is almost double than the increase in the share of men. And this is Arab students. As you know, Arabs are 20% of the citizens of Israel. And my conjecture is that inclusion is a great opportunity to get more women into high-tech topics. The rate of women from minorities in electrical engineering, computer science grows dramatically. We have similar data about ultra-Orthodox Haredim also. And about the leaky pipeline, the third dimension, as I said, our surveys show that 1 out of 5 leaves the industry. And when we ask them, are you considering coming back? They say no. But when we ask them, would you consider joining a startup company that most of its founders or managers are women? The answer was completely yes, very positive. So my conjecture is that more female leadership in high-tech companies can improve retention of women in engineering. So to summarize, I have 3 optimistic conjectures that the situation may change in the near future. First, since from my point of view, engineering is changing to become more human-centric, and if it is more human-centric, more female is attracted to deal with it. So there is here a opportunity of a change. Also, inclusion of minorities and promoting minorities into higher education opens a great opportunity to increase the share of women in electrical engineering and computer science. And if we have more female leadership in high-tech companies as entrepreneurs, etc., then I believe it will improve retention of women in engineering. Thank you very much, and you are most welcome to contact me also after this meeting if you have any question. Thank you.
Thank you, Hagit. 1 second, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, thank you very much, Hagit. Next, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Margaret Evans-Galia, AM, co-founder and co-chair, executive director of the Industry Mentoring Network in STEM, an industry engagement initiative of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering. And as I mentioned, she's also co-founder and co-chair of Women in STEM Australia. Dr. Evans-Galia has served on STEM research and workforce advocacy groups and board of committees, and is chair of Australia's Sickle Cell Advocacy Inc., a leading advocate for STEM research, innovation and inclusion. Dr. Evans-Galia is also an inductee to the Victorian Honour Roll of Women and a member of the Order of Australia. Thank you, Marguerite.
Thank you so much, Miriam.
Pleasure. I'll
Can
stop.
everybody hear me okay?
Great.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we're good.
Excellent. So hopefully you can see my slides now. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. It was a really terrific opportunity to hear more about Israel's story, particularly for women in STEM and inclusion in general. I've always understood the innovative culture and the entrepreneurial culture of Israel, and I've always admired that because I think that's something we need in Australia. So it's really interesting to see how closely things parallel in terms of the women in STEM as well in terms of statistics. So I'm actually not going to go through any statistics. I think this is a topic that's quite mature now in Australia in terms of our understanding of the challenges. And it's really around what comes next. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I meet with you today, and that's the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It always was, it always will be Aboriginal land. It's really been a valuable journey for me in this space because I first really became a gender equity advocate for women in STEM probably back in 2011. And back then, my limited understanding was, in terms of the statistics, really was from personal experience. And so what I found was, as an early career researcher, I couldn't see any issues. I wasn't really sure what people were talking about, but that's because you're surrounded by a diverse range of individuals. They're all different types of people who come from everywhere in the early career, and there's gender balance, often with more women. And so to me, it was an invisible problem until I started to mature and go up as a scientist. Then I started to see women disappear. And then, of course, I started to have a family myself and saw others around me struggling with similar issues of career disruptions and having to justify, etc. And so I think it's something that some women do tend to come to a little late. And I think in Australia, we've had this incredible momentum. There's been a series of, it's had the perfect storm over the last 5-6 years, where a number of different groups have really started this groundswell from the ground up, but also from leadership top down. And that's where the magic happens, and that's where real change can be driven. And that is exactly what's happening here. That's why there are so many programs that Amanda can put into her STEM map, her Women in STEM map, and all of the programs that we have listed on our Women in STEM Australia site as well. All of these different resources are accessible. We now have a Women in STEM ambassador. We have a pilot of the Athena Swan UK program, which measures gender equity in research organisations and then rewards those that do well with a gold, silver or bronze award. This program is rolling out to other countries, including the US, and certainly I'm confident that others in Israel are looking at this. But if anyone wants more information, I'm happy to connect you with the right people in the right place. I've also served on the Victorian Ministerial Council for Women's Equality, and that's been a real privilege working with leaders in the Victorian government, in particular the Minister for Women, in terms of introducing this incredible gender equity bill, which is all about equality and inclusion. And I completely agree with our previous speakers that this is the opportunity going forward post-COVID. We know that a lot of women have faced a lot of challenges. There's been the whole working at home and that women are the primary caretakers, and they've tried to juggle their professions, their homes, their jobs, everything. That has been a real challenge and impacted a lot of women in STEM, particularly those in research, but also those in business and government. So I think there are real opportunities. I also want to extend our thinking. I am the very first person who'll put my hand up and say we need more women and girls in STEM, particularly on February 11, which is International Women in STEM and Girls Day. But it's a case of I want to extend it beyond that to inclusive leadership. I think Hagit really polished her talk with inclusion being an opportunity. And so the organizations that are thriving with diversity on their boards and therefore having greater productivity and greater revenues or greater publications are the ones that are really fostering an inclusive mindset, inclusive practices, inclusive policies, and therefore an inclusive culture. Because a lot of the barriers that women face, and I'll touch on them briefly, are really systemic barriers that require a change in behaviour, a change in practice and policy, and therefore a career in STEM may actually become much more attractive and may actually be something that people want to do because it's so inclusive and I can do it while I'm juggling all these other things. So I want to stretch our mindset and take you on a journey with IMNIS. IMNIS is the Industry Mentoring Network in STEM. It's an initiative of the Australian Academy of Science, that's of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering, that's very focused on industry engagement. And I know we have some IMNIS mentees online this evening, so hello to you. But I think it's a real opportunity to show how inclusive leadership can be embedded across an entire initiative to really foster inclusion. And so we talk about a lot with IMNIS, the jobs of tomorrow, and how 70% of our jobs in the future will require STEM skills. And technology, obviously, we've experienced it ourselves with the pandemic. We know how important technology is going forward, particularly around data science, AI and machine learning, and all of the, regenerative medicine, medtech, pharma, digital health, growth initiatives. These are where job growth is happening, certainly in Australia. And we really do need, particularly around AI and data science, we need inclusive, diverse thinking in terms of how we develop that. We do not want the biases that exist in our population to completely shift into our technology. That would be completely unhealthy and counterproductive. So we need to ensure that we have women and girls represented in those careers. Traditionally male-dominated fields, we must definitely actively recruit, train and retain. And I was really pleased to hear Amanda Caples really reiterate that point around retention. We have an opportunity there as a country, as a sector, as a state, to really grow women in leadership roles. We have seen how powerful women leadership has been during the pandemic, and I really would love to see that carry over into our new normal, such that we focus on inclusive practices, empathetic leadership, really relying on our EQ and tuning in to what people need. And that flexible working practice has to be really pushed all the way, that's an okay thing to do. These are real opportunities, particularly for women in STEM in those fields. We also need to encourage students to develop STEM skills and pursue STEM degrees. And I see this both in the academic stream of education in terms of those who want to go to university, but I also see it in the vocational stream in terms of those who just want to develop some skills and then land a job. There's nothing wrong with that. There are so many intelligent people that want to take that path. I commend them for it. Most of them are in my family, and these are really smart people who want to learn new things, but they don't necessarily want to take that university road. I think we need to provide those opportunities, particularly for women and girls. And I've been really proud watching a terrific group called the Indigenous Women in Resources and Mining group come together. And this is about providing Indigenous women with STEM skills and other skills to take into careers into the corporate sector. That is a real opportunity for us as well, I think. So this is my particular discipline, the life sciences. I'm a gene and cell therapist. And so if you overlay the shape and gender of the academic workforce, you generally see here that following a PhD, and these numbers are now much higher in Australia. We graduate around 10,000 PhDs every year overall. But once we have PhD graduates, the majority here shown in the purple are female. That is no different to many other countries. As we have a pipeline, the pipeline is not the problem. So we have plenty of, really talented leading women graduates coming through. It's as we go up the ladder you can see in the academic career where these big red arrows are, there's just this huge squeeze and people are pushed out of the system. And that's some will choose to go, some will leave due to lack of funding, others will, you know, find a new career. And so we see that both women and men leave the sector in terms of research, but they also, we know that more women than men leave. And so we wonder where they go. And the reason why more women leave is because of career disruptions. So this is the classic point, those red arrows is a classic point to be having family. And so women are typically the primary carers and therefore experience a large career disruption. That is slowly starting to change with parental leave practices shifting in Australia, which is great. We also have very strong metrics around publications and grants. The minute you're out of your research group, particularly if you're a laboratory-based researcher, that immediately impacts your productivity in terms of publications, which immediately impacts your ability to get grants. And so there's a real issue here in terms of how we measure success in STEM and how much weight we place on each of these different elements. We should be looking at collaborations. We should be looking at mentorship and teaching and clinical load also when we're taking into metrics into account. So it's really important that we get much broader in our evaluation of success. Culture is the other one. This is a major barrier. This is where you have outright discrimination, which is much less these days, certainly in Australia, to unconscious bias, which is much more common. Everyday sexism, as it's called on social media. It's one of those things where we have to foster a culture that supports women in STEM as well as other underrepresented groups in STEM to thrive and to feel equal and included. Part of that is also around, you know, as previous speakers have said, we need more women in decision-making roles. And so, you know, what's the culture at an organisation? Are those women in the decision-making roles? Can you track that and therefore, you know, look at that in more detail over time and introduce more women onto the board, introduce more women onto the recruitment and promotion committees where they're making decisions. And we also have this, and I feel this is unique to STEM in some ways, this hyper-competitive nature. It's so tight right now, funding in Australia, that it's become a very competitive field. And we know just culturally as a society that, you know, men tend to thrive in competitive environments compared to women who thrive in collaborative environments. This isn't the case for everyone, and I never like to generalize, but that is generally the case. If we could shift those systemic barriers, I believe very much that more girls and women would engage in STEM. I also think that we'd see more underrepresented groups engaging in STEM in the long term. I really do. I think if it's a more attractive place to work and to do great research, it'll make a difference. So once we see where people go, that's the question. So what are the skills and attributes required for success in STEM, any STEM career, whether it's research or industry or government? So technically, we have to be good at what we do. So we know that academia provides excellent cutting edge STEM expertise. You are the leading expert in your field, particularly if you do a PhD in research. And then you become very comfortable with using the scientific process, the identifying questions, the critical thinking, the problem solving. And these are really beautiful transferable skills to any career. But what tends not to happen, certainly in Australia, and I can only speak for Australia, is that we miss these other elements that are really critical for success in a career. Business acumen, communication, and the interpersonal skills, how to connect with people, how to interact. And these areas are so critical and not very well translated in our education system at the moment to our researchers. And so therefore, when they come to shift careers, wherever they go, they find it a little harder because they know what they know. They know their research, but they're not always comfortable using the jargon of a different sector. And so IMNIS very much in the course of the IMNIS program, the mentoring program that we do, it's very focused on starting to broaden some of these skills and strengthen some of these skills through mentoring and engagement and professional development. And so there's lots of networking, there's lots of cross-sector engagement, there's lots of education around the whole ecosystem. And so it's about looking up through the academic bubble, away from the research that you do on a day-to-day basis, to really start thinking much more broadly and to start that leadership thinking, if you like, because you start to see the sector in a different way with a different perspective. We're very, very, very core on empathetic, inclusive leadership. We also really encourage our industry mentors to become allies of the cohort overall, to really think about inclusive practices in their own organisations. We have over 700 industry professionals as mentors in our database. All of them are at the CEO, director, board level, C-suite, management level. They are decision makers, every single one of them. And this goes for men and women in the program. And it's really about putting them in a mindset where they can work with anyone, because the student cohort that comes through and the postdoc cohort that comes through is incredibly diverse. And so they're prepared to mentor anyone and engage with anyone. And so that's been really rewarding to see. So how do we future-proof our STEM workforce? It's around really focusing on mentoring and professional development at scale. And mentoring happens in academia really well, where we mentor our rising stars and we promote them and we get them going through. It's not so much for the rest. The others that aren't standing out, those researchers tend to go by the wayside. And that's where IMNIS can present an opportunity beyond academia. So it's a prestigious national mentoring program, and we help people lead and excel within any part of the STEM ecosystem and to really think much more broadly about their opportunities. So we're not only inclusive in the people who make it happen, but in how we think and how we expose them to the sector overall. We value basic science right alongside applied science. To IMNIS, they're equally important, and certainly to the Academy. We break down barriers, we extend professional networks, and students gain professional skills and become future STEM leaders. And so it's incredibly rewarding to see a cohort of diverse, shy, less confident individuals who are really, really, really smart and know their stuff back to front in their science, become esteemed in how they handle themselves. They're confident, they're networking, they're owning their skills that they know they can do. It's a really rewarding program to oversee in terms of that development over time. So the goal is to create a new generation of industry-savvy PhD graduates capable of industry engagement, collaboration, and career transitioning with confidence. And that empowers people to be their best. And so it's really around exposure. It's an industry-led program, and it's really about measuring cultural change, because the idea of IMNIS is to create a cultural shift to become more collaborative, more innovative, more interactive. And so we know that 90% of our alumni see themselves working in industry. That's not the case, I can tell you now, for a lot of PhD students right now. 97% want to collaborate with industry. That's a very big shift in thinking. And then we have 79% want to do an internship in industry. And so the Academy is about to introduce an internship program to run in parallel to IMNIS to try and address that. So we feel that we're starting to shift thinking and perspectives. And I believe if it can be done through this, it can be done through inclusive leadership. And so therefore, what does it look like? Inclusive leadership looks like this. You can see the diversity of the leaders and the mentees that participate in the program. And we really do match anyone with anyone as long as the scientific expertise aligns, the industry expertise aligns, the aspirations align, or if there's a special request. So if a woman in STEM particularly wants a woman mentor, we will definitely aim to work that out for her. And same with someone of color, if they would prefer to have a culturally or linguistically person of color mentoring them, we work towards that as well. So we try to really address those specific needs as they come. We really also work incredibly hard. You can see our 321 mentees from the 2019-20 program. We have no problem finding gender parity in that cohort. It's a clearly diverse cohort. But in our mentors, that requires hard work, and that shows that it can be done, because we're at 46% women in that cohort, and that involved engaging so many women in specific discipline areas, those networks that are around, similar to Women in STEM Australia. There's women in mining, women in tech. These really are incredibly valuable resources for all organisations to access women in leadership. And we should make use of that as much as we can to connect with those amazing people. And so it really is reflected in our cohort as much as possible. We go beyond that and also think about diversity of the individuals themselves. So for example, we embed this throughout the program. It's in our peer review, our policies, promotions, processes, decisions, and events. At an event, we aim to have at least one person of colour on the panel. We have gender balance on our panels, and we really aim to be as inclusive as possible whenever we're asking questions and discussing a particular topic. But we'll stay focused on that topic, but we'll feed in those other questions that bring that inclusive leadership element out. It's also a case of offering childcare at events when the venue allows. That's something simple that any of us can do, and encourage venues to do that. So our venue partner, KPMG, now does that on a routine basis for us, which is terrific. And so we have today's influencers mentoring tomorrow's leaders. I think you'll agree this slide is a terrific group of leaders who are very inclusive in their practices. I'm very happy to put them out there as that, because I know each of them individually, and they're just inspirational to work with. It's an absolute pleasure. So therefore, I see this as a win-win. When we focus on inclusive practices, we know Australia's graduates are diverse, and we need to maximise the potential of every single graduate. And through inclusive practices, we can do that. They are our greatest international ambassadors, and there's going to be no one better to do that for us around the world. They are our future collaborators. We do not want to lose contact with these people. We want them to come back as the business leaders of our region. And ultimately, this will benefit Australia's health and economy and its STEM leadership around the world. And I really think it's important that it benefits the people who are here as well, living in Australia every day. So I would love to see us engaging much more with what's happening in Israel across the board. I think there's so much we can learn from you in Israel because of the culture that you have in terms of your entrepreneurship and your innovation and your startup culture. We need more of that here. There's a fear of failure in Australia that I would love for us all to get over. And we also have a bit of a tall poppy syndrome where we tend to cut down people who succeed. So I'm looking forward to this conversation going forward and to engaging much more closely in the future. So thank you very much. I just acknowledge the team because I've always got to acknowledge the team. They're fabulous. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that very nuanced and holistic overview to a very complex situation. It was really interesting to see how you refer to the different skills and attributes that are really going to bring that change, and very inspiring just to see how many touch points that you personally have within this network. And as you mentioned, I think there are a lot of complementary areas for Israel and Australia to come together. So we look forward to furthering that discussion. Lastly, I would like to hand over. Let me just get this up. I would like to hand over to Dr. Sharon Rashi Elkelis, who will share closing remarks. Dr. Elkelis is chairwoman of the Council for the Advancement of Women in STEM and Technology at the Ministry of Science and Technology in Israel. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. So I wish first and foremost to thank all the speakers for the great talks. It was really interesting to learn from leading women operating in the STEM fields, how they see the scene, what they see as the challenges, and what do they offer to do in order to change this situation. But I would like to close this great seminar in a somewhat optimistic notion, like Professor Hagit did. The fact that we're all sitting here today fills me with hope that there's a trend of change in the air. Yes, the STEM fields are still struggling with gender balance, and women are still significantly underrepresented in most of them. And yes, women are still facing barriers to entry into the STEM fields, starting with stereotypes that are impacting their decision to pursue and remain in STEM career fields, including stereotypes relative to abilities, social influences, and workplace environments. But hopefully, we are witnessing a change in tides. A growing number of movements and communities that are working to increase public awareness to the imbalance and the vital work that women in STEM occupations do. And also governments that are acknowledging the problem, which is not less important, and are willing to put efforts and funding to map and characterize the barriers and find solutions to overcome them. I am proud to say that we, at the Council for the Advancement of Women in Science and Technology, are working hard to encourage the education of girls in these fields, elevating the numbers of women students in the STEM faculties, and of course, the number of women with full professorship status, and increasing the number of women sitting in executive positions in the relevant industry. Our entire activities are planned and carried out by 3 committees, each directed to a specific stage in a women's lifetime: education, academy, and industry. And everything is supported by the Ministry of Science and Technology. So finally, I would like to thank again to my colleagues at the organizing committee that worked hard to make this event so successful: Dr. Efrat Meir-Saltoun, Miriam Seiber, and Judith Natan. And to you, our wonderful audience, I hope you enjoyed and look forward to seeing all of you again in our next webinar planned to be next month. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Sharon. On that note, I'll leave everyone with a sneak peek for the webinar number 2, webinar number 3. We hope the second webinar will be in April, looking at academic and industry intersectional engagement as a driver to further women in STEM. And then in June, the third webinar will look at inspiring female figures. Thank you, everyone. We will share the presentation and the recording as well. Good evening and good afternoon.